Hello and welcome to our review of the Sony 50 to 150mm f2 G Master. It retails for 4,400 euros in Germany. We tested it for the whole weekend on my Sony a7C Mark II. We hope to find out whether this lens is worthwhile for you in this video. You, as my loyal follower, you get a 200 euro discount on this lens. All you have to do is send me an email and I'll put you in touch with my trusted photo retailer. Let's get started. I carried this lens around with me all weekend on my lightweight Sony a7C Mark II. Yes, at 1,340 grams, it's not a light lens when you should probably have a 20 to 70mm with you, but compared to a 70 to 200mm 2.8 GM2, it weighs just 300 grams more. In return, there's less focal length but a better aperture, and that's perhaps what counts sometimes. So we have an aperture ring with a click switch on the side. Above this is a large zoom ring and a focus ring at the top. The aperture can be adjusted electronically with a click and steplessly when the click switch is turned off. On an APS-C sensor you have a 75 to 225mm image section. The filters are not cheap with a diameter of 95mm, and I can especially recommend an ND filter, because you need to expose correctly in log, for example. You can find my recommendation in the video description. There is no optical image stabilizer. This is what the footage looks like with the internal stabilizer on my Sony a7C Mark II. Without stabilizer, once with standard and once on active, with another crop of course. The three buttons around the lens can be assigned via the Sony camera menu, and a tripod clamp is included but cannot be seen here in this video. The stray light is extremely well suppressed. I held the lens up to the sun twice that day at 50mm and at 150mm, and all I have to say, a really good performance. No matter at which angle, I have rarely seen so little flare with a zoom lens. Chromatic aberrations no longer seem to exist with this 4,400 euro lens. I looked at the photos, zoomed in several times, but could not see any green or magenta color fringing. The photos you see here have not been corrected. There are dark edges at the widest aperture, and the Sony 50 to 150mm makes no difference. Whether at 50 or 150mm, there is a slight dark edge at f2. However, I have to admit that the vignetting is kept to a minimum. I have not corrected these photos here, and I must say that the performance is extremely good. There's a small difference between f2 and 2.8, but it is really insignificant. Overall, great performance. What is actually 50 to 150mm? Well, basically only 100mm that is covered in focal length, and you have to pay a really proud price for that. Of course, a 24 to 150mm f2 lens would have been more expensive, but then probably 6,000 euros and 2 kilograms of weight. On the other hand, you have a constant speed of f2, which is ideal for weddings, lifestyle and portraits, but more on that in a moment. One of the things that impressed us was the autofocus and tracking. Once you have selected what you want to track in the camera, such as birds, animals, airplanes, vehicles or people, you get perfect results thanks to the AI chip. I found the whole thing particularly impressive when I was running myself. I recently did a review about the Viltrox 85 1.4 Pro, and every time I turned around, the camera no longer tracked my head. Quite different with this lens. Once I turned around, my a7C Mark II still recognized my head. As soon as I looked back towards the camera, my eyes were recognized. Stunning performance. We tried the same thing with this cute dog here. The eyes were always in focus. The camera created a large frame around vehicles. Of course, the aperture is important. Shooting a train at a 2.0 aperture is not exactly sensible, just as little as a bus or a streetcar. But the tracking worked extremely precisely from an extreme distance. I'm curious to see how the whole thing looks like on an A1 or A9. If you have any experience with this, please write us a comment below under this video. The right mix of aperture, ISO and shutter speed makes all the difference. Add to this the focus field in the right place and nothing stands in your way of a sharp image. The photos were all taken at a resolution of 33 megapixels. We could not detect any blurred areas. If we had more wide angle, the whole thing might look a little different, but 50 to 150mm has the advantage of low distortion and therefore good performance when it comes to the overall sharpness of the image. The closest focusing distance is variable with this lens. At 50mm you need to be 40 centimeters away, and at 150mm 74 centimeters. Thanks to the continuous 2.0 aperture, you get the foreground completely isolated from the background. The more you zoom into the picture, the more beautiful this effect. Very nice for nature, street and other details. Where I can imagine that this lens offers a great benefit is at weddings. Imagine you're in a church, have this lens with you, can keep the ISO low and despite the 150mm. You won't disturb the guests, can take photos at a distance and are then ready for group photos at 50mm or the couple shooting in front of a church. I can therefore also imagine using this lens to photograph concerts at the same point and using it for more portrait shoots. A low shutter speed is essential, especially for fast movements. In times of AI noise reduction, you no longer have the problem of photos that only have noise. If you don't like using these features, you can keep the ISO significantly lower than with a 2.8 aperture, for example. Perhaps therefore a good lens for sport photographers, as long as you're not too far away from the action. I spent the whole Sunday walking the streets of Frankfurt with this lens. Personally, it wasn't too heavy for me. It's also nice for street photography, even if I have to say that it's just too conspicuous. However, if you now tend to approach pretty women on the streets to offer portrait photos and can no longer see your fixed focal length, then this lens is a real blessing. Thanks to the 2.0 aperture, it is of course also great in the dark. Unfortunately, my A7C II does not have a double ISO value like the ZVE1, for example. This camera has ISO 800 and 12,600, so you have the same noise level when shooting in lock. A great feature that my next camera must also have, as I do a lot of event photography and filming. The 2.0 aperture helps me a lot to not go so high with the ISO. With my 135mm 1.8G master, I'm well positioned, but I'm much more limited due to the fixed focal length. I would have to add 2,800 euros, but if you earn your money with events, then I can recommend that you try out this lens. With video, there's a big advantage and disadvantage at the same time. For example, if you shoot in lock and don't have an integrated ND filter, then you have to spend at least 100 to 200 euros, because 95mm naturally has its price. At ISO 800 and an aperture of 2.0, your shutter speed in daylight will be at least 1/3200, which means that movements won't look natural at all. It's great for blurred backgrounds, but not feasible for movements without an ND filter. At the same time, a really practical focal length for everyday use, unless you probably need a wide angle. 50mm almost corresponds to the human field of vision, and 150mm is usually enough to get closer to the action. However, if sport is your primary source of income, think carefully about whether a 300mm 2.8 or even 400mm 2.8 wouldn't suit you better, even if you have to put an extra 2,000 euro on the table. The shots are all crisp and sharp, and filming is really fun with this lens. All the shots were taken freehand. The best thing, of course, is the bokeh. A long time ago I had the 200mm 2.0 from Canon and it really flashed me. Unfortunately, it was completely useless for everyday use. The Sony version makes much more sense, whether at 50mm or 150mm. The 11 aperture blades provide beautiful, round bokeh balls and are simply the ideal focal lengths for portraits, nature, details and weddings. You made it to the end. Thank you very much for your time. There's a €200 discount on this lens. You can simply send me an email and I'll put you in touch with my trusted photo dealer who is available throughout Germany. €4,400 is a proud price if you do weddings for a living, work for the press, travel a lot in the dark, or maybe even photograph dogs, who knows. You will definitely get your money's worth with this marvel. Super nice blur background, extremely sharp photos and videos, super fast autofocus and tracking with the right camera. In fact, I didn't notice the 1340 grams being particularly heavy. This is of course due to the lightweight Sony body, and the lens is very well balanced. If you have the lens now, or perhaps would have it, what would you use it for? I'm very curious about your opinion. Feel free to write it as a comment under this video. You can find my camera, the monitor, and all the features from this video in the video description. See you next time here on The Daniel Life.